Yep.
Let's get it.
Ready to go.
Let's start.
Okay, here we go. Meeting is being recorded. Let me ask you, let me start by asking right now. Let me pick somebody who I haven't heard from in a while. I don't know. Shigun, you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. I'm sharing a screen with you. Am I sharing a screen with you? I'm supposed to be sharing a screen with you.
I can see it. I can see the panel, the instrument panel.
All right, panel. Is this engine running or is this engine not running?
Looks like it's running.
Running.
Now that question was for Shigun.
Oh, my bad.
Are you fine? Yeah, it's running.
Why is it running?
Because the gauges, I know that 0, so the oil temp is at, I think that's 70, and the
Okay. I can accept that. Anybody else? What is a better giveaway? Because, well, oil temp, I could have just shut down. Oil temp could be high.
Gauge.
RPM.
All right, RPM. If nothing else, my RPM gauge. How about manifold pressure?
It's idling.
It's at idle. Well, we can tell that by two things. So idle. So I'm going to turn this back on, and I probably don't need the noise here, but well, we've got it. Tell me if it's distracting. What I wanted to show you was this fuel flow gauge. And as we were talking about fuel flow gauges, there we go. Oh, actually, you don't have computer sound. I guess that's a good thing. Okay. Otherwise, it just gets noisy. See, now it's noisy. Okay. So I've got my wide open throttle here. So now look at my fuel flow. So we're going to talk about fuel flow gauges, and you can see how responsive they are to the throttle. They're reasonably responsive, and that's about indicative of where it really is. They're also very responsive to the mixture. If I can actually make it move. So you can see I just pulled it back a little bit, and I went from 23 gallons per hour all the way down to 15 gallons per hour. And you can see, looking up above, my manifold pressures are reasonably close. My RPM is still reasonably close, but I've really pulled that fuel back a long way. And you can see my oil temp came up really nice. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that when we're talking about these fuel flow gauges, this is what we're talking about. And we're going to talk about those hopefully today for quite a bit. Okay. I'll put that away. Okay, so yesterday, and I realized it'd be smart if I would just put a little note where I left off. Yesterday, we left off talking about the constant effort spring. Well, we talked about two springs. We had the constant head idle spring, and we talked about the constant effort spring. And I'm going to pull those things up right now. Eventually, here we go, for current slide. There we go. So we have the constant head idle spring and the constant effort spring. And we had also looked at, about that, don't look at that. We also looked at this one. And where was the other one? I had another one, I'm sure I did.
Yeah, there was another diagram.
It showed the spring, but it showed it in the wrong spot.
I think that might have been a continental diagram as opposed to the Bendix one.
No, Continental doesn't have that spring.
There was something where it said Continental at the bottom of the page.
Oh yeah, it does, and I'll tell you why. It's kind of funny. Actually, I don't remember why anymore. It does say Continental, but it's not a Continental. I'm glad you brought that up. Impact there. I think it just had something to do with these springs. So I'm going to pull this back up from current slide. See what Harry's talking about down here? It says servo pressure related or Continental Motors. This is thanks to Continental Motors, which, if I'm not mistaken, Teledyne, it was Teledyne Continental Motors. Teledyne ended up buying Cessna. And Cessna's, of course, had these engines in there. So therefore, they had this stuff put out. But it really isn't the Continental system. it is in fact the Bendix system that we're looking at. So we spent a lot of time working on that one. And then we have this one where it does show the spring. Oh, there it is. That's what I was thinking. It shows right here the constant head spring and the center body. So it said the constant head, and remember the constant head idle spring, and it shows it right in here. But I don't really think that's accurate, because this is a much better and more detailed drawing. And if you remember yesterday, or even if you don't remember yesterday, I'm going to tell you now. So if we dissect this and we look at what's going on, I should have this. This needs to be the metered fuel pressure. So metered fuel pressure. This is the unmetered. So if we looked above, let's see, looked above it. Let me get one that's going the right way. Oh, that one, we'll use this one. So we have, well, if we called this, I don't want to give it names. So this is the metered, this is the unmetered, and then we have the impact, and then we have the Venturi. So that's what we're looking at. And we're going to go back to where we were. There we go. So metered, unmetered. Then the next chamber has to be impact. And the last chamber, which really isn't, they're not doing a very good job on this drawing of showing it, which I understand because it really doesn't matter, but we'd have to have a wall going over here, which would then make that, this chamber, the Venturi. So the impact, the Venturi. So if we looked at it like this, then we can easily see what is where. So the constant effort, the constant effort spring, and then the constant head idle. I call it the constant idle because that's the book I was using and I like the most for this stuff. Has that one as the idle spring. So that puts this one over here in the Venturi, and then it puts the constant effort into the impact chamber. But be that as it may, that's really not that important, and I don't. I'm not worried about that with you. I just want you to remember two things. One, the constant head idle spring is the idle spring. So you can just remember that. There's an idle spring. In fact, half the time I even allow you just say, well, there's an idle spring and I don't remember the exact full name of it. I say, okay, you're good. It's idle spring. And you'll say there's an idle spring, and you will say that helps keep this servo valve rod out of, gives it the idle pressure. I'm just not having luck with that thing.
So these two springs are working in the same direction, right?
They are. Both springs are working to help open up the servo valve. Now, in my opinion here, this is me, my opinion, this spring, as well, this isn't my opinion, but this is the way it's supposed to work. This spring is supposed to push this, which is tied to the servo valve, to the right, which would then open the servo valve a little bit. So if we wanted to pretend like this is all relaxed, so we're just in idle right now, there's very little metered pressure, very little unmetered, it's having no effect here. Well, I shouldn't say that, this is gonna be constant, but all right, so we don't have the Venturi impact air metering force, there's no force. So this spring should be pushing this out a little bit, and this is attached to that. And so that should be pushing the ball out a little bit, which means I should see a little bit of space right here, the way it's drawn. But I'm going to take that a step further. Because there's no space here, that means that this has actually moved to the point where it starts to touch here. And now these two things are moving as one. So that means it's actually off idle. That's what I think. And so this should be open a lot more, but yeah, it's just an artist rendition. So constant head idle spring, just like with the pressure carb, it gives us enough fuel flow through idle that we can run. The constant effort spring, it just helps to push, if you look at this, helps to push the impact and Venturi. It really helps the transition between not a lot of air metering force to more air metering force. So it's just helping out there. So that's all you really need to know about that. All right, so yesterday I left off with, I wrote number 2, a constant effort spring in the impact air chamber supplements the transition from idle to servo regulator control and helps move the air diaphragm smoothly from low to high power settings. Everybody agreed that I wrote that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, this is last.
All right.
Yeah.
I like all the responses. I wanted to make a change to my notes here.
Yes.
Yes. All right. And then, so this was 2, and then I wrote all that, which brings this down here to A. It pushes from housing to air diaphragm. So I don't know if that makes much sense. So it pushes from the housing or the stationary part to air diaphragm. All right, now we're way back this way. This is gonna be 0.3. So idle circuit in servo is connected to throttle linkage. So idle circuit in servo is connected to throttle linkage. Well, I think before we start writing that down, we need to come back over here and look at this from current slide. So last thing I wrote was it pushes from the housing to the air diaphragm. So this is the housing. This is the housing right here. It doesn't move. And here's the air diaphragm here. So that spring pushes from the housing to the air diaphragm. And I think I want to go with this one. Okay. So the next thing I said is the idle circuit in the servo is connected to the throttle linkage. So let's take a look at that now. So we've added a little complexity here, and we're going to add 2 things to this. Well, we're going to add a lot of things to this. But okay, so we're very familiar with this chamber, this one, and this way. We know how all of this works, and we know about the main metering jet. And sorry, I'm trying to, how Hector, I don't know. But we didn't have in the previous drawing, we don't have any throttle. It just is what it is. And of course we have a throttle over here, but how did that help us over here? So it didn't do anything, and we didn't have any control at idle. So we're going to now look at how we can add these things in here. So we'll talk about the mixture control later, but for right now, we'll assume the mixture control is wide open and doing nothing and has no effect. So down here at idle, of course, we've got a range of idle down here. And so you can't just have the spring say, well, spring, you just take care of it. And we're just going to maybe have more air, maybe have some less air. And hey, good luck with that, because that's how it works. So what's going to happen is during idle periods, we have this right here, this idle valve that is connected to the throttle. And so when I open when the throttle is mostly closed, it is going to close this off, which in effect makes the main metering jet really, really small. So now it's like an idle metering jet. And as I start opening the throttle, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until some point, the space here is bigger than the main metering jet. And then that means the main metering jet does all of the work. All right. And so that's going to be the off idle is going to run the main metering jet. So it's a lot like the exact same thing we saw in the PR58 simplistic drawing. In fact, it's exactly the same in that the throttle was connected directly to an idle mixture, and that's what that is. Now I want to tell you about this right here, this interesting little thing. This right here is a mechanic adjustment. So as I told you guys, and I'm warning you now, when we're finally back in the lab, for every single carburetor, for every single fuel injection system, I will always ask you a set of 2 questions. And that will be, and there will be more depending on your answer, but I will say to at least one of you, how do you adjust the idle speed? And you had, oh, please tell me you can adjust the idle speed, because it's always just a stop screw. Always a stop screw. You're just looking for a stop screw that controls how far the throttle valve closes. It's the easiest question there is, and yet half the class never gets it. So how do you adjust the idle speed? And you would say, this screw right here. I would say, how do you adjust the idle mix? And then you have to be able to find that screw. And you should know that on the carburetors, it was the idle mixture screw, and I showed you those. Well, this right here is the idle mixture screw for this particular device. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it moves the relationship between the idle, between this right here and this right here. So if you kind of think that through, so let's say I had this closed this much, And I want to know, am I running rich or am I running lean? And so how do you find if you're running rich or lean? You pull the red knob back and you should get a 25 to 50 RPM rise. Nothing changes, right? It's always the same answer. And I don't get a rise, right? If I don't get a rise, what does that tell me, somebody?
It's the wrong screw.
The screw is not Jess Properties.
All right, yeah, you just screwed at the wrong screw. Okay, that is not the answer I was expecting.
Looking for
Thank you for
lean?
that.
Lean.
It's running lean, yeah.
All right, if I don't get a 20 to 50 RPM rise and it dies, I pull the red knob out and the thing just dies. What does that tell me, Abby? Abby's going to answer me. For Abby, going once, going twice. Mr. Shaw, are you with us?
I'm here.
Whoa, I have my finger on the button, man. What's the answer?
I didn't got that.
Oh, -1. Richard, you're up next.
I'm here. 1 second. So you said if the engine doesn't die, can you repeat the question one more time?
All right, listen up, Abby. If you pull back the mixture control and you do not get a 25 to 50 RPM rise before it dies, what does that tell you about the mixture? Is that a no-go? Matt, you know?
Maybe it was running too lean.
Okay, running too lean is the correct answer. So if it's running too lean, what I have to do is allow more fuel through, and I adjust this, and it adjusts the relationship between this, and it opens it up just a little tiny bit more, so I get more fuel, and it does run a little richer, and that's how I adjust it. If I had 100 RPM rise, Kevin, what is that? Because you're next on the list. Oh, Kevin's way up there.
Sorry. I forgot I have to hit spacebar. 100 RPM rise that you're running too rich.
Running too rich. You are correct. So I would want to adjust this little screw to close it off a little bit. All right. So that's idle mixture screw. So that's what this is doing. So remember, off idle, this is out of the way and allows this, the main metering jet, to do all the work. Back at idle, that's just too big. So this comes in and it sets the main metering jet in that area.
Kevin,
All right. What's up?
did you have a picture of these or just a drawing?
Well, oh, I've got a real one sitting here. I can find it for you. It'll make me get up out of my chair and go look for stuff. Zeus, where'd you do with it, buddy? Here it is. It's right there. So here's the screw, and there's the two linkages. So you can see one linkage is connected directly to the throttle. So when I move this linkage, I'm actually moving the throttle. So directly in. But this one goes off the throttle down here to the mixture knob, which is that little, now it's not a plunger that goes in and out, it's a series of discs, but the idea, it works. And so if I want to change the relationship between these two, I just rotate this and it actually spreads them out or brings them in closer. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this thing, but I will tell you, it's kind of interesting in that if you could actually see it, this half over here has fine threads and this half over here has coarse threads. And there, so it's designed so that as you screw it, it moves it together and apart. And then there's a spring. I don't know if you can see the spring back in here, but that's, oops, that spring.
Did you mean reverse threads?
Actually, no, it's coarse and fine. Coarse and fine. And
That's the idle mixture?
yeah, the idle mixture. That spring down here, all it does is it goes through these little, it sets in these little cutouts and keeps it from moving. It's kind of like the safety, but on an airplane, you can just move it by hand, and then that spring keeps it in place. We're going to talk more about that.
That was the idle valve mixture.
That was the idle, idle mixture adjustment. That's this right here, going to this bar, which is not really a bar at all. It's a series of sliding discs inside. Let me see. There. Let me write about that now. So 3, I had idle circuit in servo. So idle circuit. Whoa, lost my pen. Idle circuit in servo. In servo. Servo is connected to throttle linkage. Is connected to the throttle linkage. To the throttle linkage. Throttle linkage. At idle, the main jet, well, not the main jet. Let me see, at idle, I wrote the main jet is reduced in size, but it's not really the main jet. So the idle, for lack of a better word, I'm gonna say the idle pin, just so we can, in the idle pin in the drawing, There we go, the idle pin. It's sliding discs actually. Idle pin reduces the size of the main metering jet. Metering jet. So main metering jet just in the drawing stays put, but it's actually inside the carburetor. It's pretty much what it does, really. I'm trying to make it so it makes sense according to the drawing. Okay. And then that, of course, allows more fuel in. At the same time, I could say, well, I'll say that this allows less fuel into the unmetered chamber, or sorry, the metered chamber. And the reason why, and I wrote this, is this creates a larger pressure differential, larger pressure differential in the fuel metering force between the two chambers, which tends to close the valve. Which tends to close the valve. And yes, I do know what time it is. So that was a very quick one. We barely got anything accomplished. Hopefully we got something accomplished. I'm going to put this here, letter G, and I'm going to give you a break, and we will be back in 10 minutes.
10-minute nap.
All right.